Our first guest tonight is the most powerful movie star in the world. Top Gun Maverick is nominated for 6 Oscars, including Best Picture. Please welcome the one, the only Tom.
Everyone knows Tom Cruise, the movie star. But nobody knew the real Tom. The boy who almost became a Catholic priest at 14. The teenager kicked out of a seminary for stealing wine. The man who later gave 40 years of his life to a very different faith. Then on live TV, music. In a moment nobody expected, he said the name of Jesus out loud. Not in a script, not in a film, in front of millions of viewers watching at home. What he did in the seconds after that line has people asking questions nobody can fully answer. Tom Cruise entered the world on July 3, 1962 in Syracuse, New York. And from the start, his childhood had no steady center. His father, Thomas Mather III, worked as an electrical engineer, but his career never settled and the family kept moving from place to place. For Tom, that meant one fresh start after another. Except none of them really felt fresh. By his teen years, he had gone through 15 music schools in 14 years. Every move dropped him into a new hallway, a new classroom, music, and a new group of kids ready to notice whatever seemed off about him. Sometimes it was his accent. Sometimes it was his shoes. Sometimes it was simply the fact that he was new. He later said he never had a really close friend because he was always the kid who arrived, music, late and did not fit. That constant uprooting shaped him early. He was not just growing up poor, he was growing up unplaced. Life at home gave him even less peace. His father did not only lash out physically. He knew how to create calm first, and that made the fear worse. Cruise later described him as the kind of man who would make you feel safe and then suddenly strike. Those memories stayed sharp for decades. He called his father a bully and a coward in words that sounded measured, not impulsive. That tells you how deeply it had settled inside him. For young Tom, home became a place where trust could vanish in a second. He learned to stay alert, to read the room, to brace himself. Even before fame, even before Hollywood, he was already living with the kind of tension that keeps a child watching every tone, every movement, every shift in mood. Then came a turn that seems surprising when you know the public version of Tom Cruise. Before Scientology ever entered his life, he seriously moved toward Catholicism. In the fall of 1976, when he music was 14, he enrolled at St. Francis Seminary in Cincinnati, Ohio. He was one of 68 freshmen and had been encouraged by a priest named Music, Father Rick Schneider. The structure appealed to him. He went to daily mass and responded to the discipline. For a while, it gave him something childhood rarely had. It gave him order. Yet, even that chapter could not hold. The ending came after he and his close friend Shane Dempler stole alcohol meant for a priest's music celebration and slipped away to drink it in the woods. He was expelled and the seminary door closed as suddenly as so many other doors in his early life. School itself had always been a struggle anyway. Cruise was diagnosed with dyslexia at age 7, and that challenge followed him through most of his education. He spent years in remedial classes trying to keep up in a system that never seemed built for the way his mind worked. By the time he finished high school in 1980, he later said he was functionally illiterate. That is a heavy thing for any young person to carry, especially one already moving through the world with so little stability. Reading was not simply hard for him. It felt like proof that something essential was out of reach. That matters because years later when Scientology entered the picture, it did not arrive as an abstract belief system. It arrived offering an answer to one of his oldest wounds. The church's study technology claimed it could solve the exact barriers that had haunted him since childhood. And for Cruise, that promise landed with real emotional force. Before that turning point, one more major break had shaped him. In 1974, when Tom was 12, his mother, Mary Lee South, finally decided she had had enough. She left his father and took Tom and his sister, Lee Ann, from Canada back to the United States. Cruise later spoke about that moment with obvious admiration. To him, it was the day his mother found the courage to draw a line and protect her children. By 1978, when he was 16, she had remarried a man named Jack South, and the family finally felt some real stability. It did not erase the years before, but it gave Tom a home that felt less dangerous. He would not see his biological father again until the man was dying of cancer years later. And even then, there was no real reckoning. The past stayed where it had always been, close enough to influence everything, but never fully spoken through. That unsettled childhood helps explain the speed and hunger with which Cruise attacked acting once he found it. His film debut in Endless Love in 1981 was tiny, almost too small to notice, and on its own, it would not have announced much. What mattered was what happened next. That same year, he joined TAPS and came in with a role that was meant to stay in the background. During 4 weeks of boot camp-style rehearsals at Valley Forge Military Academy, director Harold Becker saw something more in him. Cruise had intensity, focus, and a kind of push that stood out even in a cast full of rising talent. He was promoted into a speaking role, sharing the screen with Timothy Hutton, who had just won an Oscar for Ordinary People, and Sean Penn in his first film role. Cruise was only 19. Yet people in the industry began to notice that he did not carry himself like someone waiting to be discovered. He carried himself like someone trying to force open the door. Then Risky Business arrived in 1983 and changed his image almost overnight. The famous underwear scene became one of the most recognizable moments of the decade. Music, and what makes it even more memorable is how much of it came from Cruise himself. He later said music had lived it. He cleaned the floor, used tape for grip, put on socks, and found the slide that would make the shot work. Music director Paul Brickman even revealed that Cruise had floated wilder ideas before they settled on that version. The result felt playful, effortless, and magnetic, which is exactly music. Why it hit so hard. The film was made for $6.2 million and grossed $63 million worldwide. That kind of return gets attention. So now Cruise was no longer just a young actor with drive. He was a breakout star music, with charm, nerve, and a screen presence that audiences instantly remembered. By 1986, Top Gun pushed him into a different category entirely. This was no longer a rise. This was domination. The film earned $356 million worldwide and became the highest-grossing movie of the year. Cruise, now playing Maverick, became a global symbol of confidence, cool, and speed. The U.S. Navy understood the effect right away and set up recruiting tables in movie theater lobbies. Stories spread for years about the film's impact on enlistment and aviation applications. And while different sources argue over the exact numbers, the larger truth is easy to see. Top Gun made military flying look thrilling, glamorous, and unforgettable. And Cruise sat at the center of that cultural wave. With one film, he stopped being a promising young actor and became one of the biggest stars on the planet. At the same time, something much more private and much more lasting was beginning in his personal life. In 1986, Cruise met Mimi Rogers at a dinner party. She was older, already deeply tied to Scientology, and much more significant to that world than many people realized at the time. Mimi had grown up inside the church. Her father, Philip Spickler, was not a casual follower. He was a mission holder and close to Elrin Hubbard. She trained in her father's mission in Palo Alto and became a Class 8 music auditor, which placed her high inside Scientology's internal structure. By the time she met Cruise, she was not simply involved. She was part of the church's inner culture in a serious way. Their relationship moved quickly and they married in May 1987. Yet, the marriage brought more than romance. It also brought Cruise directly into Scientology. And that connection would shape the rest of his life, far more than anyone around him could have guessed. To understand why he was such music, a powerful recruit, you have to look at timing. Elrin Hubbard died on January 24, 1986, and David Miscavige, only 25 years old, moved to consolidate control of the church. One major focus was the Celebrity Project, an idea Hubbard had already started. The goal was simple and strategic. Famous people could attract attention, build legitimacy, and bring others in. Cruise was a dream target. He was young, newly famous, emotionally vulnerable, and still carrying the pain of dyslexia and childhood instability. Music. He was also at a stage where he wanted mastery. He wanted control over the parts of music himself that had once made him feel weak, especially his struggle with music reading. So when Scientology presented its study tech as a breakthrough, it hit exactly where it needed to. Cruise later said many people had tried to teach him, but nobody had taught him how to learn. For someone who in music had spent years feeling blocked by words, That kind of relief could feel life-changing. His marriage to Mimi Rogers, though, did not last. They married in a tightly guarded ceremony in 1987 music, and by late 1989 the relationship was already ending. Cruise filed for divorce and music. It was finalized in February 1990. Later accounts from former Scientology executive Mike Rinder painted the breakup as something more organized than personal drift. According to Rinder, church officials actively worked to get Rogers to agree to the divorce so Cruise, music, could move on cleanly. By then, another woman had entered the picture. Nicole Kidman met Cruise while filming Days of Thunder in 1990, and former church figures later claimed that church leadership saw her as a better fit for their larger goals. Whether every detail of that version can be pinned down with certainty or not, one thing is clear. Cruise's personal life was no longer just personal. By this point, the church, its leadership, and its ambitions were deeply entangled with his most intimate relationships. Meanwhile, his career kept soaring. Between 1986 and 1989, he delivered a remarkable run that proved he was much more than a box office idol. He appeared in The Color of Money with Paul Newman under Martin Scorsese's direction, then Rain Man with Dustin Hoffman, and then Born on the 4th of July, where his preparation was intense enough to blur into lived performance. He used a wheelchair for weeks, attended meetings in character, and music, spent time with real-life veteran Ron Kovic, whose story the film told. Born on the 4th of July cost $18 million and brought in $161 million worldwide. More importantly, for Cruise, it brought respect at the highest level. He won the Golden Globe and received his first Oscar nomination. At that point, he had become something rarer than a big star. He was now seen as an actor with real dramatic power. As the 1990s moved forward, Cruise's status became almost absurdly strong. In 1996, he pulled off a record no actor had achieved before. He starred music in 5 consecutive films that each grossed more than $100 million domestically. A Few Good Men, The Firm, Interview with the Vampire, Mission Impossible, and Jerry Maguire. That run turned him into the most bankable actor of the decade. Mission Impossible alone earned $457 million worldwide and expanded him from actor to franchise force. Then Jerry Maguire added something even more valuable. It reminded people that he could still deliver warmth, wit, and emotional precision. The film made $273 million worldwide on a $50 million budget, earned him another Oscar nomination, and gave him a line that entered popular culture forever. By the middle of the decade, Cruise was doing what almost nobody manages. He was winning at the box office and staying in the awards conversation at the same time. Yet, even at the peak of that dominance, the tension between his stardom and Scientology kept tightening. During his marriage to Nicole Kidman, former church figures later described growing conflict between Kidman and the organization. According to Mark Marty Wybun, Kidman's relationship with Cruise was not welcomed once she began to appear resistant to the church's pull. The same Wybun would later make even darker claims connected to Eyes Wide Shut, the long and exhausting Stanley Kubrick production that shot through 1999 in England. He alleged that Cruise became suspicious enough of Kidman to suggest surveillance, and that Scientology leadership treated her as a threat in part because her father was a psychologist, which placed him in a profession the church openly despised. Those claims remain explosive because they turn a celebrity marriage into something far colder and more controlled. Whether one accepts every detail fully or treats some of it with caution, the pattern they suggest is difficult to ignore. Cruise's life was unfolding inside a system where loyalty, influence, and private pressure were constantly in play. That same year brought Magnolia, which gave him one of the boldest roles of his career. He played Frank T.J. Mackey, a furious, manipulative self-help guru, selling a harsh fantasy of masculinity to rooms full of men. Cruise had reached out to Paul Thomas Anderson himself after seeing Boogie Nights, and the director responded by sending him the script. The result was startling because the role felt so charged, so ugly, music, and so emotionally exposed. It earned Cruise his 3rd Oscar nomination and a Golden Globe win for Best Supporting Actor. More than that, it showed that beneath the polished image and action star aura, he was willing to go somewhere raw. That mattered because by the end of the 1990s, the public knew Tom Cruise as a superstar. Magnolia suggested there was still another level inside him, one connected to rage, control, fear, and performance itself. Then the 2000s brought a collapse, music, in public image that played out in full view. Cruise filed for divorce from Nicole Kidman in February 2001 after 10 years of marriage. And Kidman later said she did not see it coming. Reports tied to former Scientology members described the breakup as another moment where church influence was intense and music direct. Kidman was reportedly labeled a potential trouble source because of her family ties to Scientology. And after the divorce, she was treated as a suppressive person, the church's harshest designation. Former members even described Bella and Connor, the children Cruise and Kidman had adopted, being guided into language that turned them against their mother. Whatever the exact internal mechanics were, the emotional result was plain. One of Hollywood's most famous marriages shattered, and the shadow of Scientology hung over the whole story. Cruise soon began a relationship with Penelope Cruz, but even that romance reportedly unfolded under church scrutiny. Music. Former insiders said Cruz went through auditing sessions and that Scientology leadership evaluated whether she fit into Cruz's life in the approved way they wanted. She practiced Buddhism, and accounts from former officials suggest that refusal to give up her own beliefs made her a poor match in the eyes of the church. After that relationship ended, the music stories became stranger. Shelley Mskievich, the wife of David Mskievich, was said to have overseen an effort to find Cruz a suitable partner, with multiple women being screened before Katie Holmes entered the picture. The whole idea sounds unbelievable until you realize how many former music insiders have described versions of the same system. Cruz was no longer simply a member. He was one of Scientology's music most valuable public faces, and that status meant his love life carried organizational importance. Then came May 23, 2005. Cruz appeared on the Oprah Winfrey Show to promote War of the Worlds. And within minutes, the interview had turned into one of the most replayed television moments of the decade. When Oprah mentioned Katie Holmes, Cruz jumped up, grabbed her hands, dropped to his knees, and then bounded onto the couch in excitement. The moment itself lasted only seconds, yet it spread everywhere. It was strange, intense, and impossible to ignore. Oprah's visible surprise only amplified it. For some viewers, it looked like joy. For others, it looked unhinged. In truth, it did not matter which interpretation they chose. The damage came from the image itself. Cruz, who had once seemed perfectly controlled, music, now looked erratic in front of the whole world. A few weeks later, music. He deepened the problem by attacking Brooke Shields on live television. Shields had spoken publicly about taking Paxil for postpartum depression, and many people saw her openness as brave and helpful. Cruz, appearing on the Today Show with Matt Lauer, dismissed psychiatry as pseudoscience and insisted there was no such thing as a chemical imbalance. He also made deeply flawed claims about medication, including Rolin. What should have been a conversation became a spectacle. Cruz came across as certain, aggressive, and disconnected from the realities many people knew firsthand. Backlash hit immediately. Medical organizations and mental health advocates pushed back hard, and the public image he had spent decades building took another hit. By then, it was becoming difficult for audiences to separate Tom Cruise, the actor, from Tom Cruise, the spokesman, for beliefs they found troubling or extreme. That growing discomfort had real consequences. In August 2006, Sumner Redstone, then the head of Viacom and Paramount's parent company, publicly severed ties with Cruise in a way Hollywood almost never sees. Music. Redstone said Cruise had embarrassed the studio and cost them money. He even put a number to the damage, claiming Cruise's public behavior may have cost Paramount as much as $150 million in lost ticket sales tied to Mission Impossible 3. Even though the film still made $397 million worldwide, Redstone Music added a personal observation that sounded both blunt and revealing. He said women, including his own ex-wife, had turned against Cruise in large numbers. Cruise's production company, which had spent Music 14 years on the Paramount lot, was shut down. For an actor who had spent the 1990s looking untouchable, this was a public fall that felt shocking in its speed and scale. In January 2008, the internet got a glimpse of Tom Cruise that felt almost unreal. A 9-minute Scientology video filmed a few years earlier for an internal church event leaked online and spread fast. Cruise stood in a black turtleneck with an ID badge on his chest, staring straight into the camera and speaking with absolute certainty. He said Scientologists were the real experts on the mind. He said they were the people who could truly help after a car crash or a disaster. The clip was music. Intense, strange, and impossible to ignore. Then the Church of Scientology tried to shut it down with legal pressure, and that only made things worse for them. Copies multiplied across the internet, music. And within days the video had turned into one of the most famous images attached to Cruise's public connection to Scientology. That strange public image matched stories that had already been building behind the scenes. Former Scientology member Mark Headley later described a world where Sorgorg workers, who he said were paid very little, were expected to handle Tom Cruise's daily music comfort like it was a sacred assignment. In his telling, workers cleaned, cooked, cared for property, and handled personal tasks for free, while church leadership kept close watch over the details of Cruise's life. Other reporting added another layer to that picture. Vanity Fair's reporting on Scientology and Cruise described a system that reached into music, his relationships as well, with claims that young actresses were quietly evaluated as possible partners for him in the early 2000s. Nazan Boniadi later emerged as the most discussed name in those accounts, and the church denied the allegations, but the reporting stayed in the public mind because it made Cruise's private world feel managed, controlled, and far bigger than a simple celebrity romance story. That is music. Why Katie Holmes's exit hit with such force in 2012. Cruise and Holmes had married in November 2006 after the birth of Suri earlier that year, and for a while it looked like the polished celebrity ending Scientology wanted the world to see. Then everything changed very quickly. On June 28, 2012, Holmes filed for divorce in New York while Cruise was away filming, and the case moved with stunning speed. The settlement came in just 11 days, which made people wonder what had been happening in private long before the filing became public. Reports that followed painted Holmes as careful, prepared, and quietly determined. Whether every tabloid detail was right or not, the overall shape of the story was clear. She wanted out, and she moved with precision because she knew exactly how much was at stake. Even music. With all that noise around him, Cruise never really stepped back from Scientology in public. In October 2016, during the London premiere of Jack Reacher, Never Go Back, he spoke openly about it again and said he had been a Scientologist for more than 30 years. He called it a beautiful religion and said he was incredibly proud. That moment mattered because it came after years of criticism, after documentaries, after former members had spoken out, music, and after Scientology had become one of the most controversial parts of his image. Still, Cruise chose loyalty. He did not sound hesitant. He did not sound cornered. Music. He sounded settled, and that made the message even stronger. By then, his movie career music had also begun its own comeback story. After the fallout from the 2005 Oprah appearance and the bruising press around Scientology, people in the industry were already asking whether Tom Cruise's time at the top had passed. Then Mission Impossible Ghost Protocol arrived in December 2011 and changed the tone completely. Made for about $145 million, it grew into a global hit with roughly $694.7 million worldwide. The Burj Khalifa sequence became the image everyone remembered, and word of mouth did the rest. Cruise was no longer the star people were writing off. He was suddenly the center of a huge global success again. And that success became the first step in a much longer second act. He pushed that second act even harder by turning danger itself into part of the brand. In Rogue Nation, he held onto the side of an Airbus during takeoff. In Fallout, he attempted a rooftop jump in London, broke his ankle during the stunt, and the injury made it into the final film because the camera was rolling when it happened. Fallout then became the best-reviewed mission film at that point with a 97% music Rotten Tomatoes score, and it climbed to about 791.1 million worldwide. The message was simple and very powerful. Cruise was not drifting into late career comfort. He was making physical risk part of the show, and audiences rewarded him for it. That same image sharpened again during the pandemic. In December 2020, leaked audio from the set of Mission Impossible 7 captured Cruise yelling at crew members over CO safety rules. He said they were the gold standard. He threatened jobs. He sounded furious, intense, and deeply aware that shutdowns were costing huge amounts of money. Some people heard the audio and thought he sounded controlling. Others thought he sounded like one of the only stars in Hollywood acting as if the stakes were real. Either way, the moment fit perfectly with the public version of Cruise that had been building for years. Disciplined, demanding, theatrical, and unwilling to relax when the machine around him was under pressure. Then came the biggest payoff of all, Top Gun. Maverick opened on May 27, 2022 after long pandemic delays, and turned into a phenomenon. It broke the Memorial Day opening record in the United States, kept drawing crowds through the summer, and finished with about $152 billion worldwide, including roughly $721.8 million domestically and $780.4 million internationally. It became the biggest film of Cruise's career and the biggest film in Paramount's history. The timing made it even more remarkable. This was not a young star riding a first wave of hype. This was Cruise's 36 years after the original Top Gun, somehow becoming even bigger. Yet, the deeper tension in his story has never really been about box office numbers. It has been about belief. Before Scientology ever entered his life, Cruise came out of a Catholic background and even spent time in a Franciscan seminary as a teenager while thinking seriously about the priesthood. Biographical reporting says he stayed about a year before leaving, and stories from that period have helped create one of the sharpest contrasts in his life story. Later, critics and former Scientology researchers pointed to advanced Scientology teachings and argued that the Church's private doctrinal world clashes directly with historic Christianity's view of Jesus. That contrast has become a major source of fascination because it makes Cruise's spiritual journey feel dramatic. Even to people who know little about theology, they do not just see a star in a controversial religion. They see a man who once moved close to one faith and then gave his loyalty to something very different. That tension helped fuel a whole wave of online storytelling in 2025, especially around Jonathan Roumie from The Chosen. Videos began circulating with titles and thumbnails that suggested some explosive live confrontation between Cruise and Roumie over Jesus. The clips were built to feel real. They used serious narration, dramatic pauses, and familiar images. They drew power from a genuine religious conflict, but the actual event they described never appeared in any verified broadcast record. What people were really responding to was the emotional charge of the idea itself. Cruise, the face of Scientology, being pressed on Jesus by a man famous for playing Jesus, felt like the kind of moment people wanted to believe had happened. The story spread because it satisfied that desire, not because the evidence was there. There was, however, a smaller real-life moment that gave those invented stories just enough fuel to survive. Evangelist Dylan Novak has publicly said that he managed to hand Cruise a Christian gift bag at the 2016 Jack Reacher premiere. According to Novak, Cruise accepted it, thanked him, and even kept the bag with him through the screening. The story was never a live television showdown and never became the dramatic conversion moment some people imagined. But it mattered because it gave the internet a real scene to build around. One brief exchange, one famous face, one spiritual message passed through a very controlled space, and suddenly 1,000 exaggerated versions could grow from that tiny seed. Meanwhile, Cruise kept moving forward in public, and recent years have shown that he has no interest in creating distance between himself and Scientology. In March 2026, celebrity and entertainment outlets reported that he appeared in the front row at Scientology's annual event honoring founder L. Ron Hubbard in Clearwater, Florida. Reports tied the gathering to Hubbard's 115th birthday celebration and described Cruise seated alongside other famous Scientologists rising in support of David Miscavige. The timing was telling. Online arguments about Jesus, Scientology, and Cruise were already circulating widely by then. Yet he appeared exactly where everyone would expect him to be. Present, visible, fully aligned. That same pattern shows up in his work. Mission Impossible. The Final Reckoning did in fact reach theaters on May 23, 2025 after several delays, and Cruise has already remained attached to more large-scale film work beyond it. So, the larger picture feels very clear now. He keeps choosing motion. He keeps choosing scale. He keeps choosing loyalty. Every few years, the world thinks it has finally found the scandal, the contradiction, or the pressure point that will force a break in the image. Then Cruise steps back into the spotlight with another hit, another stunt, another public appearance, and the story starts moving again. That is why people keep watching. The mystery has never fully gone away.